Welcome to Living with Purpose. Today, I have Jon DeVaan, who is a long-time executive at Microsoft, who spent almost 30 years there and has had numerous roles as a software engineer and as an executive and in the leadership position, having worked on a number of versions of Excel. For those of you who use it and love it, Jon has played a significant role in it. But he is also now very much focused on democracy, the value of democracy. He chairs the board of an organization called RepresentUs, which is to a large extent a grassroots effort to ensure that we have representation that is just as and honest and rooting out corruption in all forms through in our politics. So please join me in welcoming Jon. Jon, welcome.
Thank you, Akhtar. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Jon, share with us your life story, your growing up and how you came into Microsoft and some of these amazing work that you've done there and what you're doing now.
So I had a very traditional American post-war growing up. My parents were the first generation after their parents had immigrated to the United States. They were farming families, and my mom and my dad were the first ones to move away from the farm and move to the city in Minneapolis, and grew up in the suburbs, went actually to Catholic school, and through elementary school, and then public school. And there had never been a person in my family or my cousins even that had gone to college when I was able to go to college. So my parents were able to help me a little bit, but I basically had to work my way through college, a few student loans that were able to support me. But in those days, one could do that. It's not like that today for people. It's much more financially difficult to get a college education. I started thinking I wanted to be an electrical engineer, but then didn't like my professors. So I started doing mathematics, and in the course of doing my math major, found I had an aptitude for programming, so I added computer science and was interviewed by Microsoft in college and started in 1984. My first project was a program called Microsoft File, which I'm sure you remember. Nobody remembers it. And it was for the Macintosh, actually. People don't know that Microsoft was the largest and may still be the largest ISV on the Macintosh. It was a part of the vision that Bill Gates had. But when I joined Microsoft had started working on Windows, but it hadn't released yet. And not too long after I started, I joined the Excel group. We had a guy named Mike Maples join the company who just recently passed away, fantastic man, who was an excellent mentor and had a big influence on me, certainly. So we worked Excel when computers became powerful enough and Windows became adept enough at multitasking. The idea of having a product like Office became viable, and all the work to integrate the fiercely independent programming teams and marketing teams for all the different individual applications and create Office was a big part of my career. And I think it required really understanding everybody's dignity. So switching from competitiveness to cooperation between all these different groups of people was an interesting aspect of making Office come true. I worked on a variety of different things after working on Office. I worked in the online world for a while and did the TV stuff with Web TV and a platform for set-top boxes called Microsoft TV. And after that, I worked on a thing called Engineering Excellence, reporting directly to Bill, where this is at the time period Microsoft had some very obvious public engineering failures. Longhorn. There was a version of SQL Server, I believe, that were failed engineering projects. And so we wanted to go through and start figuring out and paying attention to, it's not just what we make, but how we make it. That's really important. And I learned a lot during that Office period. Similar issues came to the fore. So that helped guide me in figuring out how to make our engineering practices more reliable. And then I joined the Windows group to apply those engineering excellence principles to Windows and made Windows 7 and Windows 8. Another interesting thing that happened over the course of that career, you remember when Microsoft was being sued for antitrust. So this is the late 90s, early 2000s. A U.S. Senator named Orrin Hatch, on the record, said, Microsoft, if you'd have been giving your campaign contributions, you wouldn't be in any trouble now, which is a fantastically corrupt statement. So in response, Microsoft started the Microsoft PAC. And if you were an executive at Microsoft, you were invited to all the politician dinners and stuff like that. And you had a front seat to the ridiculous hockey stick compounding growth of money in politics. So when I left Microsoft, I thought the most important thing that I can do is to fix that problem, figure out how to get money out of politics. And that's what took me to RepresentUs, and a lot of learning actually about what democracy means and how we can work to make our democracy better.
So John, just going back in time, you were obviously part of the frontmost seat since 1984 with the growth of Microsoft, the company where it's now. Obviously, Bill has just come out with his book, Source Code, where he talks about his early years of the journey before the formation of Microsoft. And you spent a very close amount of time working with Bill, and you understand the complexity of the company. Share a little bit about that, and then maybe we'll come back and chat a little bit about the philanthropic work that Microsoft has also done, in which you were also quite engaged in.
When I started, Microsoft was 10 years old. There were 600 employees. Microsoft had business around the world, often with partnerships instead of actually Microsoft-owned subsidiaries around the world. Japan is a big example of that. And I'd say the management culture, it's interesting because there was a model for management, which probably was best expressed in the recruiting environment. Hire people who are very smart, the smartest people that we can find, and people that were driven, had a degree of drive, and basically let people go. It was a very deep swimming pool type of management. Throw people in and see if they can thrive. And it was a surprise for me personally. I grew up in the Midwest. My dad worked at a big company, and I was expecting to have weeks of training and all these kind of things. Nope. I was coding the first day I arrived at Microsoft. And over time, the company grew in its sophistication on how to manage people. I mentioned Mike Maples earlier, and he brought a degree of sophistication. He organized us in business units, where when you think about managing people, there's no organization that can solve all problems. You're always going to have a degree of error in the organization that has to get made up for with other kind of mechanisms. But Mike had recognized that the primary thing was the business result of being focused on a particular set of customers with a particular product and organizing around that. So we became the analysis business unit originally, but we were making Excel in that group of people. There was the Word business unit, the PowerPoint. So that was the organization. And it was really relevant when we were a distant number 2 in all these product categories. There was Lotus 1-2-3, there was WordPerfect, so we needed a concerted effort to focus in those markets and figure out what people wanted and figure out how to do it better than the competitor. And that was a really important thing. I talked about Office at stepping point. That's when the focus had to change because the market was changing. People didn't just buy one product, one application product anymore. And if you were a company, and that was probably the biggest driver of this phenomenon, they didn't have the bandwidth in the IT group to have all these separate trainings, all these separate, each person having their own software, different mixes of software. They wanted to have a standard software that they could have standard training and train everybody on. And it made a lot of sense because that's how you lower the cost of owning all this software. We had to reorganize to make that happen.
Talk a little bit about just your interactions with Bill and what were some of the nuggets that you drew out of the way he showed up.
Bill has always been very intense and competitive person, but I think it's wrong if you just focus on those dimensions to him. That intensity and competitiveness it's one outcrop of his native intelligence. I mean, he's a very, very smart human being. And, at the end of the day, we could often have meetings where the tone was less than collegial, shall we say. But at the end of the day, Bill would let people do their jobs. He wouldn't try to interfere. He would let people do their jobs. And I think that was a really important part. And if you understood how to educate Bill and listen to Bill, he could add a lot of value to what you were doing because of that native intelligence. And because he wouldn't override you if he thought that you knew what you were doing.
What is interesting is this play between somebody really being incredibly smart, native intelligence, as you call it, and then there's also being self-aware of understanding people have their own ability to produce and letting that happen, which a lot of people forget in terms of when they become leaders of organizations.
Yes, and we're living through that now, and what we see with what's going on in U.S. politics and the government. People show up, they don't really know anything, they see things they don't understand, but yet they have the arrogance to go and do something anyway. And it's not a good leadership style. It's not the way to get good results.
We are segueing into RepresentUs. Talk a little bit about the genesis of the organization. Of course, you kind of talked about your interaction with the senator during the Microsoft court case and what stuck in your mind. But talk a little bit about why this organization is needed and what would happen or not happen if we are not successful.
So RepresentUs started as an organization that worked to pass public financing laws across the United States. RepresentUs was involved, for all the listeners that live in Seattle, who have democracy vouchers, which is where every registered voter is sent 4 $25 vouchers that then candidates for city office can come and talk to you and ask for your democracy dollars. And this is an innovative campaign finance law that has really raised participation in city politics. It's improved the diversity of the people that run and win for office, and has decentralized the fundraising. There were 2 zip codes that contributed pretty much 100% of the money in city races until the democracy vouchers law was passed. And those 2 zip codes still give most of the money, but the other zip codes have much more participation. And that has the candidates out talking to all those people and not just the people in those 2 zip codes now, which is a really big and important and valuable outcome. So that's how RepresentUs became known to me. And also through this time, I started to get an education on democracy. In the United States, we have barely over 50% voter participation. And I think the popular way to talk about it these days is too many people feel like their vote doesn't matter, or when they show up to vote, they have to vote for the lesser of 2 evils. And that's really a statement of people feeling like their government isn't working for them or representing them. So in the course of that learning, then there became other policies beyond the public financing, things like getting rid of gerrymandering and things like increasing the competitiveness between political parties by using open primaries and ranked choice voting. So what this does is it allows the immediate impacts of it. You look at Alaska as an excellent state to show the impact of the open primaries and ranked choice voting. Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska, can vote independently from directives of Donald Trump. She could vote to impeach Donald Trump and not have to worry about getting primaried by Republicans and ending her political career. you look for gerrymandering. Michigan is a good example. Michigan was highly gerrymandered. The people of Michigan got together and passed the law to create an independent redistricting commission so that instead of the politicians creating all the political districts that maximize their political party's power, the independent redistricting was able to create a structure that would be more representative. And so it went from being an overwhelmingly Republican congressional representation and legislative representation to being basically a purple state now. So it's more representative, and there's not a lock-in or a lack of competition in elections in Michigan. All these things are important because when you have a democracy and there aren't that many people voting because they don't think their government's working for them, that's bad. That's not democracy. You need to make the government work better, and you need to change the rules of how the elected leaders come into office to make sure that their incentives are more aligned with people's objectives.
What do you hope to achieve? This is fascinating work. Right away, it's hard work, very fascinating work.
It is hard because the politicians that are in office now came to power through the existing system, and so they want to resist changing it. The political parties themselves in particular. And one of our dysfunctions of the day is a political system where the parties have too much power in that they can change the rules, not in favor of representativeness or better government performance or anything like that, but change the rules to bolster their ability to hold power. And so that means you have to take an approach to bring people in. The only way to beat these kind of locked-in political powers is to bring people. And that's what RepresentUs hopes to do. We publish videos on the internet that attract people, and we get people to sign up to volunteer, and we can give them work on relevant campaigns across the country. But this is just the basic organizing. So we can get those people activated. They can be activists, volunteering. We can help them learn so that they can start organizing groups in their city, in their state, so that they can start passing these laws that make democracy better. Because it's not going to change in Congress. Those politicians are all locked in with the current system because it benefits them. You need the people power to pass laws locally, to build power, to pass laws at the state level, to build power to be able to pass eventual national change.
Jon, we can continue this conversation for a very long time, but I would like to, as we come to a close, share a little bit about the importance of purpose for you and why you think purpose is important in the way we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just started learning about your structure around purpose.
Part of it is that, we have a transactional mindset where we kind of focus on doing things so that we can be. But what purpose is all about first starting off with how do we be so that we can do effectively and then have, which really becomes the way we can be fulfilled and joyful and content rather than just being focused on material health.
I can only describe myself as a recovering do have be. But that said, and this does get to the early days of Microsoft when you're talking about Bill. And there's always a component of Microsoft's culture about giving back to the community. In reading Bill's recent book, you see the impact of his mother and his father on how he thought about responsible people give back to their community. And so that's an ethic which I picked up at Microsoft. That it goes along with one from my upbringing, which is the, people who are given much, much is expected. And then there's also, I think, a real sense of justice as part of the discussion here, which is, and I've expressed this, I think I sent you the link to my op-eds in the Seattle Times. At the core, we are all equal. I mean, we're all different, but we're also all equal. And as equals, we respect each other as human beings, sharing the same unalienable rights. And that develops a sense of cooperation and empathy between people. I was reading Timothy Snyder's book on freedom, and there's a very interesting thing that I learned out of that book, which is if you're really free, then you're helping other people be free because you recognize that when that person isn't free, you can't be completely free. And that's that sense of justice that I'm talking about. And I think this is a purpose I hope all free people can unite around and use that determination, that sense of justice to make a better world for ourselves, our children, and everyone.
I love this. The way you've kind of framed it is that if you can't be truly free if others are not free.
Right.
And that purpose becomes the driver to work towards that collective freedom, which allows all of us to show up in the way we each want to show up.
Exactly.
To extend the common good.
Exactly.
So let's end with you sharing with us your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you want to leave us with.
One nugget. That's a very difficult question.
Maybe two.
I'm going to kind of pick up from what we were just talking about and have that remind us that, first of all, it costs nothing to be kind to the people around you. And real purpose is what you do for others, not what you do for yourself.
I really love this word kindness because it really does not cost anything to be kind. In some ways, it actually costs much more to be mean.
Exactly.
Because for yourself, it actually costs you to be mean just because of what it does to your insides of your body and to your brain.
Yeah.
Whereas being kind and smiling actually helps you heal. So I love that. I love the fact that, really be kind. And be kind because purpose is not just about you. It's about all of humanity and how we show up for humanity. Jon, thank you so very much for being on this podcast. Greatly appreciate your time. Again, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. One big takeaway, it really does not cost you to be kind. So hopefully everyone will continue to spread kindness. Thank you so very much. Jon, thanks.
Thank you very much, Akhtar. My pleasure to be here.